This man is building a secret underground hideout that would be impossible for anyone to discover. This is not just a simple hiding place. He is constructing it to the highest possible standard, as if it were an entirely new house built beneath his original home. At the beginning, he noticed the large area surrounding his house and thought about taking advantage of it. But then another idea crossed his mind. Why not make use of the space directly under his own house and build a hidden underground shelter that no one would ever know about? That is exactly what we are going to see in this video. The most difficult part is how he will manage to build this hideout without damaging the original house. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The first thing he began with was the area in front of the house. He dug a large pit and started excavating a long tunnel that would connect to the house. This stage is one of the hardest phases of the entire project because it is extremely sensitive. Any mistake in depth or shape could affect the stability of the whole building. In addition, digging is physically exhausting, especially since it takes up a large portion of the project, but these are the struggles of the beginning. The tunnel he is digging will be both long and wide, so that movement inside it is easy, comfortable, and provides greater safety. After finishing the excavation of the tunnel, he moved on to digging the actual space of the hideout itself. At the same time that the excavator was working, he was also busy transporting and distributing the soil inside the pit, especially in the tight and narrow areas. He also levels and smooths the ground after the excavation. At this point, the first stage of digging is finished, and honestly, everything that happened before was just preparation, because what comes next is the real challenge, especially since any mistake in the upcoming stage could cause the entire house to collapse. That's why they are now working very slowly and carefully. The excavator is removing the soil with extreme precision to make sure no problems occur. They actually opened 2 openings beneath the house, then brought in a metal plate and placed it inside the excavation. He was extremely cautious while installing it, especially because some of the soil underneath the house was already loose and unfortunately collapsed. After that, they brought in steel columns to secure and support the house so that nothing would happen due to the hideout being built underneath it. For installing these columns in such tight and complex areas, they used a red jack because lifting the house using ordinary methods would not be possible. This hydraulic jack is capable of lifting the house with ease, and it also allows precise control over both speed and height. Now the columns are securely in place, the house has been lifted off the ground, and they are able to remove the remaining soil from beneath the house. At this stage, the work has shifted from simply moving some soil and doing basic digging to becoming true underground engineering. Every step is carefully planned and clearly defined to avoid damaging the supports that are holding up the house. The first major section of the excavation is now complete, and so far, no problems have occurred. The upcoming part will be done entirely without using the large excavator, because all the work here will be carried out using this small loader instead. It is the most suitable machine for digging in this location. After completing a very large section beneath the house, he switched to a small excavator, which is a type of equipment that is perfectly suited for working in spaces under houses and in areas where heavy machinery cannot reach. He dug 2 openings at the end of the house, exactly like the 2 openings that were made at the front of the house, and installed the columns that will support the house from that side. After the house was secured, the loader returned and continued digging underneath the house. While he was working, a large piece fell that he was unable to remove, so the large excavator came back in to lift it out and then continued excavating the rest of the area. Now the excavation process is complete, and they are moving into a new stage, which is determining the exact size of the hideout that will be built. At this point, the project floor has been leveled and gravel has been placed on it. The first thing they did after preparing the ground was install drainage pipes so that if rainwater or groundwater enters, it does not accumulate and damage the project. After securing the pipes inside the hideout, he began bringing in quantities of soil and gravel and placing them in front of and behind the pipes. These are essential precautions against underground leaks. The hideout here relies heavily on this drainage system because if this shelter or hideout were to fill with water, it would be completely useless. So far, everything is going perfectly. The supports and columns are all in place and fully holding up the house, and everything is stable. After removing the soil that had been placed around the drainage pipes, he brought in wooden planks and laid them over the pipes, leaving a gap between each piece. Then he went back and leveled the ground again. At this point, the excavation work continued. The excavator returned and began digging in the area between the drainage pipes, where unfortunately water actually appeared underneath. Now he continues completing the drainage system he started earlier and secures wooden boards onto the pipes using nails. After that, he brought in a white pipe and installed it at the end of the line. He then added steel rods and fixed them to the wooden pieces that had been placed earlier using thin wire to secure everything in position. Next, he brought more wooden planks and placed them lengthwise, fastening steel rebar onto them as well, this time arranged longitudinally. He did this along the entire length of the pipes. Of course, the work is not finished yet. The concrete mixer arrived to pour concrete over all of this. They used the loader to transport the concrete because the mixer itself could not reach all the areas. As soon as the concrete was poured, they leveled it to a single even surface before it began to set, which is a very important step. On top of this concrete foundation, they will place special insulation panels. These are not ordinary insulation boards, they are specialized forms known as insulated concrete forms. These forms provide thermal insulation from the inside and also from the rest of the house. So this hideout will not be an ordinary structure at all. It will be an underground house designed for exceptional strength and energy efficiency. The steel rebar will form the structural framework of the supporting columns, which will later be integrated into the walls themselves. After completing the first course of the insulated concrete forms, he moved on to the second level. He brought in additional steel rebar and began placing it inside the insulated forms, then continued stacking the remaining rows of forms on top. He kept repeating this process until all the walls were fully completed. Along the sides, there were long metal pieces and tension braces, which were used to hold the forms firmly in place so that they would not shift while the concrete was being poured. They began installing these braces onto the forms and anchoring them securely into the ground to prevent any problems later on. After that, he installed the tension ties that were attached to long wooden boards and fixed these boards firmly into the ground. He did this along the entire length of the wall. On another wall, he began attaching wooden panels to every two forms using nails, and along their edges he installed the rebar and tension ties in the same way as on the other wall. At the end of the wall, where the doorway opening is located, he installed small wooden pieces using nails. Then he secured a large wooden panel to them, placing it there to serve as the end form for the insulated forms. He did this across the entire doorway from one side. After that, he placed the remaining insulation forms above the door and completed the entire wall. At another opening of the hideout, he did the same thing. He covered all the edges of the forms with wood without fully closing them and installed additional steel rebar inside the forms themselves. With that, this section was completed, and they moved on to the part beneath the house. They installed a beam under the house and lifted it using the jack, raising the house slightly higher so they could finish working on this section. He's not just placing the insulated forms and leaving them as they are, he's securing them with external supports so that when the house is lowered back onto the hideout later, the weight of the house does not rest directly on the forms. Instead, the load is distributed evenly onto the ground, allowing the structure to remain extremely stable. They brought in more steel rebar and placed it inside the insulated forms behind the house. After installing the rebar, they completed the walls using the insulation forms. This step was finished, and the space began to take clear shape and definition. Now they moved on to a new step. The concrete mixer arrived, and they began pouring concrete into the insulated forms. They used buckets to transfer the concrete from the pump to every section of the forms. This process is extremely important because it fills the forms completely with concrete without leaving even a single centimeter empty. This creates the strongest possible permanent support for the structure. He proceeded step by step with the hose while pouring the concrete to ensure that no gaps or voids were left behind so that no problems or cracks would appear in the future. This concrete transforms what was once an empty space into a solid, real structural framework. After they finished filling the insulated forms with concrete, they designed 2 square sections on the ground using wood and filled them completely with concrete. After that, they went back and leveled all the concrete on top of the walls, removing any excess material and bringing everything to the same uniform level. Next, they used a spirit level to make sure the wall was perfectly straight and not leaning. The bubble inside the level was centered, which confirmed that the wall was properly aligned in the vertical direction. After that, they lowered the house using the loader and also from the other side using their equipment. He then brought a torpedo level to double-check whether the wall was straight or tilted, testing it in 3 directions: horizontal, vertical, and at a 45-degree angle. After that, he marked the exact spot where he would drill in order to insert the steel rebar coming out of the hideout wall. He then used an electric drill, which is typically used for drilling through heavy wood, and began drilling the hole directly above the steel rebar. Next, they brought a sill-sealing insulation strip and placed it on top of the wall. This strip is made of foam and is used to prevent moisture from rising from the concrete into the wood. It also helps prevent corrosion, mold, and fungal growth, and reduces the chances of insects infesting that area. After laying the insulation strip along all the walls, they began lowering the original house onto the hideout walls, guiding the house so that it fit onto the steel rebar protruding from the walls. They lowered the house very slowly at this stage to make sure no disasters would happen, and thankfully this step was completed successfully. After this step was finished, the house and the hideout structure effectively became one single unit. However, there was still an important thing left to address: the columns and temporary supports that had been holding the house in place. For that reason, they brought in chain hoists and attached them to the ceiling, then began removing all the steel supports, as well as the ladders and nearly everything else that had been installed temporarily. They set up 2 hoists and 2 workers started lowering the large supports. These supports were brought down one by one, and once they reached the ground, they were still in one solid piece, which meant they could not be taken out easily. So they began cutting them into smaller sections using a saw. The small loader then pulled each piece out one at a time. After all the supports were removed, the space was finally clear. All that remained was cleaning up the area and organizing the remaining spaces after the excavation. The first thing they did was remove all the wooden braces that had been installed earlier to support the walls. Once part of them was removed, the entire wall underneath became fully visible. They continued working, and there was one very large wooden piece, so they brought in lifting equipment to remove it. They repeated the same process with all the wooden supports in every direction. There were also wooden panels attached directly to the walls, and they began removing the nails and taking those panels down as well. On one side, there was a wooden board lying on the ground covered with a lot of sticky dirt. He cleaned it thoroughly, then spread gravel across that entire area. He went back and cleaned the place again and applied waterproofing material along the sides using a silicone gun. On another side, there were many fallen blocks, which he removed completely and cleaned the area. He then poured gravel there, cleaned the surface, and applied the waterproofing material. There were cracks in the forms from the outside, so he sealed them properly. He then brought paint and coated the edges of the walls from the bottom, the sides, and the top. Over this coating, he applied a sealing tape to prevent water from leaking and entering the foundations, keeping the area dry and healthy. He continued painting all the walls from the exterior side. Of course, he did not leave them like that. He applied the sealing tape over them from every direction. After that, he brought in black waterproof sheeting and fixed it to the wall, extending part of it onto the ground. On top of the sheeting, he added another layer of gravel.
Then he installed a long drainage pipe and connected it to another pipe. Over these pipes, he added more gravel, and on top of all of that, he laid another layer of black waterproof sheeting. The waterproofing process of the hideout did not stop there. He added even more gravel onto the black sheeting and spread it across the ground. He also installed rigid foam insulation panels on the ground and on the walls to create a continuous insulation layer around the structure. This helps reduce the use of air conditioning and heating, while also resisting weather conditions and moisture, making it beneficial in both aspects.
In the empty area, he placed a board and poured concrete, then added gravel in front and soil behind it, filling the entire void up to the top. There were still spots that had not yet been waterproofed, so they went back and completed them exactly as they had done before. They continued filling all the gaps around the house, placing gravel next to the house and soil next to the gravel. This method works because the spaces between the gravel allow water to move away from the house instead of being absorbed. After filling all the existing voids, they leveled the ground so that the entire area was uniform, making the exterior ready. Now they were ready to start the waterproofing and insulation work inside the hideout. The first step was distributing soil evenly across the area. They also removed wooden boards that had been buried in the ground. Next, they used a compactor machine to press down the gravel layer, preparing the base for the next step. After that, they spread a layer of gravel across the floor, then installed 2 leveling devices on the ground and covered them with a layer of soil. They continued with the layout by adding another layer of gravel, then installed and buried the piping in the soil. Over the pipes, they added another gravel layer, completing the coverage of the entire floor with this protective layer. After preparing the floor, they planned to install some columns and supports inside the hideout as the next step. They brought 3 screws and fixed them to the top of the wall to secure the 2 pieces in place later. After the screws were installed, they mixed some cement and applied it to fix them firmly. Next, they secured a red column in the middle of the floor using screws. After that, they brought in the supports that they were going to install. These supports were extremely heavy, and the workers barely managed to position them correctly. Then they brought a welding machine powered by electricity and began welding 2 pieces of steel together for the supports that were connected to the central column. They welded the parts in place so that they became one solid unit. Next, they poured another column to make it even more stable. Underneath the house, additional columns will be installed to provide significant support for the structure. Once this step was completed, they started laying a layer of insulation on the ground, securing it with plastic along the sides. They opened the sheets at the columns and inserted them so that the insulation would fit snugly, then glued it in the center to keep it fixed in place. After covering the entire floor with this insulation layer, they began installing a water-based underfloor heating system. The first step was to lay out the orange fixing mat with raised bumps, which serves as a mounting system for the heating pipes. Once the mat was fully in place, they began installing the red pipes, threading them between the raised bumps. These pipes are very strong and are now securely positioned for the heating system. The system is specifically designed to carry the hot water coming from the boiler or central heater. To secure these pipes, they placed a metal mesh on top of them. After completing the pipe installation, they began working on the ceiling framework, which will be made from wood. Before laying the wooden panels on the concrete, they first applied a moisture barrier strip, securing it to the steel rebar protruding from the concrete. Then they installed the wooden panels and fastened them with screws. They did the same on all 4 walls and also installed wooden panels on the iron beam in the center of the ceiling. Additional wooden panels were fixed to the side walls to create interior partitions. They divided these partitions into 2 sections and adjusted the section in front of the house precisely. Next, they installed the panels for the ceiling itself. These panels were placed in a specific pattern, leaving equal spacing between each panel to distribute the load evenly. They cut some panels in reverse, again leaving space between them. On top of these foundations, they installed the large panels that would cover the ceiling. Once one part of the ceiling panels was installed, there was still an empty section next to the hideout. They filled it with soil and gravel, as in the rest of the area, then continued installing the remaining ceiling panels. Finally, the last step of the project was pouring the floor with concrete. They poured the concrete and leveled it carefully so the floor would be immediately ready, smooth and perfectly even. They used a specialized machine to remove any excess material. Once the concrete dried, they finalized the surface by cleaning and washing it with water. The empty ground beneath the house, which had no use before, was transformed into a fully functional underground hideout built with the latest equipment and the coordinated effort of a full team, all focused on creating it to the highest standard. So, what do you think of this hideout? Many people prefer to comment on it since it was uploaded on YouTube, which means it is no longer a completely secret hideout, but the exact location remains unknown. So they benefited from sharing the content, and we got to see and enjoy this incredible project. I hope you liked it. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.